Hello everyone, it's great to be here today. My name is Emer and my research basically revolves around women's accounts of and encounters with classical statues in 18th century Ireland and Britain. The research I'd like to share today involves the artist Angelica Kauffmann and the place of classical statues and particularly classical nudity in her work. Before we launch into a discussion of Kauffmann's work, I want to draw your attention to two classical statues that will be really important in the discussion. One of these is the Belvedere Apollo on the left, and the other on the right is the Belvedere torso, both confusingly with the same epithet of Belvedere, but two distinct statues. These statues were quite visually ubiquitous in 18th century culture, partly to do with an increased amount of tourism. So British tourists were able to go to Italy and see the antiquities on display there, but also because increasingly plaster cast copies of these images were made and shipped home to Britain, where they were displayed in museums, used as part of artistic training, and displayed in homes. These statues have often been considered as a kind of part of high culture. The so-called father of art history, Winckelmann, described the Apollo Belvedere as the highest ideal of art among the works of antiquity that have escaped its destruction. But while these statues were certainly associated with the high-minded, they also had a sort of implicit association with the more lowly parts of culture as well. This can be seen in this painting by Richard Cosway called A Group of Connoisseurs, in which a group of men look at a selection of classical statues. Although everything seems rather normal to begin with, once you look closer, you see that a lot of the men are rather turned on by what they're seeing, and several of them even have their hands down their trousers. I think an image like this is a really important one to bear in mind when we're thinking about classical imagery in this time period, because it reminds us that with classical statues, because of the ubiquity of nudity, there was this kind of implicit association with the pornographic as well as the high-minded. Now on to Angelica Kauffmann. Kauffmann was born in Switzerland, but spent most of her career working in London and in Rome. She was hugely successful. She was one of the founding members of the Royal Academy in 1768. She, along with Mary Moser, were the only two female members of the 36. In this painting by Zafani, we see both Kauffmann and Moser depicted in portrait form on the walls, while all the other founding members are present in the room. Perhaps the reason why Moser and Kauffmann were not included as being present in the room is due to the fact that there are two life models there as well. Although life drawing was an integral part of artistic training, it wasn't considered quite respectable for a woman to engage in. So what did a woman such as Kauffmann do if she wanted to improve her knowledge of human anatomy in order to further her art? Well, she could turn to classical statues, as can be seen increasingly throughout her work. Kauffmann worked as a historical painter, which meant that as well as scenes from history, she also included lots of scenes of Greek and Roman myth, as can be seen here in her Ariadne abandoned by Theseus, which bears a lot of resemblances to the statue of the sleeping Ariadne in the Vatican museums. She seems to have favored choosing women's narratives and women's perspectives in her artwork, such as her painting of Cornelia here. And she also seems to have liked choosing stories about artists, such as her painting of Praxiteles here. Her contemporaries were quick to note that although she had a very advanced and mature understanding of the human form, she often avoided depicting nudity where possible. This set her apart from her contemporary historical painters, who often did choose to depict nudity in their scenes from Greek and Roman myth. So much speculation was involved in talking about how Kauffmann had achieved her knowledge of the human body, and also the lengths that she would go to further that knowledge. In this painting here by Nathaniel Dance, we see Kauffmann sketching from a small statue form of that bears a lot of resemblances to the Belvedere torso. Her eye line is intently gazed on the statue's buttocks. If you think that your view of this painting may be informed with more details about Nathaniel Dance. Dance wanted to work as a historical painter but didn't get that much work. And in order to get by, he mostly ended up working as a portrait artist. He had a relationship with Kauffmann in the 1760s when they were both in Rome, although this finished in 1764 when Kauffmann returned to working in London. I think it's telling that this painting was completed after the end of their relationship, and that she was obviously succeeding in a field that he would quite like to work in himself. Another painting that comments on Kauffmann's connection to nudity is this by Nathaniel Hone. This is a sketch for his painting The Conjurer. It's not actually the finished version, but this was the one that he submitted to the Royal Academy, hoping that it would be included in their summer exhibition in 1775. As soon as she saw it, Kauffmann objected to this painting on the grounds of the figures in the upper left-hand corner, the nude women who are kind of cavorting around St. Paul's. She believed that the figure in the black stockings with the long black hair was meant to represent her, although there has been some speculation that the little girl in the painting also represents Kauffmann. The man in the painting is supposedly representing Joshua Reynolds, the president of the Royal Academy, who Kauffmann was rumoured to be having an affair with. Kauffmann was deeply offended by this painting and wrote a letter to the Academy in which she said, "I have but one request to make, to send home my pictures if that is to be exhibited." The Academy chose Kauffmann over Hone in this instance and told him that he had to change his painting if it was to be exhibited, which he did, and he took out the nude women cavorting like Maenads around St. Paul's. I think this is a useful image in showing that Kauffmann was simultaneously being seen as very childlike because of her avoidance of nudity, yet also her understanding of the human form was seen as something kind of licentious. And so in the upper left-hand corner, she's being visually compared to a Maenad or something similar. As time went on, Kauffmann was increasingly open about where she had received her visual training. So in this painting from the late 1770s, Kauffmann shows herself sketching from life from a cast copy of the Belvedere torso. It was a bold move, I think, of Kauffmann. It wasn't really considered above board even for women to be sketching from classical statues, but perhaps she felt the need at this point, after the whole scandal with Hone, to address the source of her knowledge of anatomy. But nevertheless, the importance of classical statues continued right throughout her work. So we see here her study of a standing woman from 1792, in which the drapery and the body of the woman bear clear resemblances to statues of Roman matrons, such as the small Herculaneum woman type from Athens shown here. But there was still some reticence in Kauffmann where nudity was involved. Even these sketchbooks, private sketchbooks from the late 1790s, show that she wasn't quite comfortable with depicting full nudity. Her version of the Apollo Belvedere on the right here sketches out the whole statue but leaves out the genitals. So even in a private sketchbook, she was reticent to sort of show the full knowledge, I suppose, of male anatomy. And I think that looking at nudity in Kauffmann's work really shows that there was this fine line that women artists at this period had to tread. Their work had to be seen as legitimate, but also socially acceptable. They had to know about the human form in order to be considered good artists, but they weren't allowed to acknowledge where they had received that training from. I think also you can see how Kauffmann's contemporaries and perhaps her professional rivals as well really used the language of classical statues as a form of invective against her, whereby they were able to allude to the seedier aspects of classical statues that everyone sort of knew existed, and therefore suggest that Kauffmann herself was not entirely a respectable figure. I hope you've enjoyed what I've outlined here. I've included a small selection of bibliography if you're interested in reading further about these topics. And please, today, if you want to leave a comment or send me a message, I'd be really happy to respond if you have any questions about the talk, or otherwise you can find me on Twitter, and if you're interested in engaging with my research there. Thanks very much.